Hello everyone, climb aboard for the final stories of the extended railway series. These stories are taken from the book More About the 8 Famous Engines. Emily's New Route. Emily stopped to fill up with water on the way to the flour mill, but Henry was already there. The fat controller is asking me to pull trucks of flour to the bakeries across the island. You are lucky, Henry said. I had to do the Black Lock run. Why don't you like going to Black Lock? Asked Emily. There are boulders all over the tracks, he bellowed. They bash your buffers and scratch your paint. And there's the Black Lock monster. What's the Black Lock monster? Asked Emily. Nobody knows, said Henry. Black figures move in the water and then they disappeared. And Henry puffed away. Emily was pleased that she didn't have to go to Black Lock. At the flour mill, the flour had been loaded into the trucks. Emily was coupled up. Then she puffed across the countryside to her destinations. But the troublesome trucks saw a chance for mischief. Hold back, they giggled. Emily pulled as hard as she could, but the trucks made her go very slowly. Emily was late delivering the flour, so there would be no fresh bread that day. The fat controller was cross when he found out. This means I won't have any toast or crumpets for breakfast. If you're late again, then you will have to do the Black Lock run instead of Henry. Emily didn't want to. I must get the flour to the station on time, she said. Next week, the troublesome trucks tricked her again. Off we go, they chuckled, but they weren't coupled up properly. Mustn't be late, they chattered. So Emily puffed quickly away, but only half of the trucks went with her. Emily arrived at the big station to drop off her load. But you only brought half the flour, the station master cried. So Emily had to go back for the rest of the trucks. When she arrived at the mill, the trucks were more troublesome than ever. Emily the late engine, they sang. This made Emily very cross, and she biffed them very hard. Oh no, they cried, and they splashed into the duck pond. Emily was covered in a floury mess. That evening at the sheds, the fat controller came to see Emily. I am not pleased with what I heard about it earlier. Now you will have to take over the Black Lock run. Emily was very unhappy. Wait until you try it, said Thomas. The Black Lock run might be nice. I don't think so, Emily moaned. Bash buffers and a big monster. It sounds miserable to me. The next morning, lots of exciting children and holidaymakers were waiting at the big station as Emily puffed sadly in. They were all looking forward to their holidays. I mustn't let them down, she said to herself. Soon Emily was steaming up hills and through valleys. I bet it won't last, she said to herself. Soon she reached the murky waters of Black Lock, near Lord Callan's castle. That's where the monster Henry said was supposed to be, she said. Then there was trouble. Rocks fell and blocked the line. Oh no! Emily had to wait for help. I knew I wouldn't like this route, she groaned. Suddenly she saw something dark and mysterious moving in the water. And now the monster's coming, she said. Emily was scared. Her boiler quivered and her valves rattled. She wanted to steam away. I never wanted to see Black Lock again. But Emily thought about the visitors in her coaches. She was determined to get them to their holiday whatever it takes. At last the water settled, and Emily saw what the monster really was. It's a family of seals. Emily was really delighted. The visitors were really delighted too. Harvey came to clear away the rocks, and soon the line was cleared. Emily steamed on. The visitors had reached their holiday on time. That evening, Thomas and Emily both stopped to watch the seals. You were right, Thomas. Black Lock is a nice route after all. You can do it, Toby. One morning, Toby was delivering some milk tankers. He puffed across the island and up Gordon's Hill. Gordon's Hill was very steep. Toby puffed hard. It was a long climb. Just then, Gordon arrived at the bottom of the hill. But today the express was heavy, and Gordon had to wait for Edward to help. Bother, huffed Gordon. Soon Edward arrived and buffered up behind Gordon. Edward pushed and Gordon pulled. At last the express train started to move. Toby had finally reached the top of the hill when Gordon puffed past. Slow coach, Gordon huffed. I'm trying me hardest, gasped Toby. Pa, sniffed Gordon. You might not reach the top next time. Toby felt very hurt. That night, the Fat Controller came to Farquhar Sheds to see Toby. Edward is needed at the docks, he said. You are to work at Wellsworth Yard in his place. Yes, sir. But why me? Why can't Thomas or Percy do it? They know Wellsworth Yard better than me. They are busy elsewhere, and you're the only engine available. Besides, the quarry is closed off for the next few days. Besides, a change of scenery would be nice. Can I take Henrietta, sir? No, what would the passengers do without her? Don't worry, Toby. I'll take care of Henrietta until you get back, said Daisy. As you say, sir. The next morning, Toby puffed out of his shed. I hope no one needs my help pushing them up Gordon's Hill, he puffed. He arrived at Wellsworth Yards. There were lots of trucks and they looked very heavy. I'll never be able to shunt all those, Toby puffed. You can do it, Toby, called Boko. That made Toby feel much better. Then he started to shunt the trucks. He shunted china clay trucks into one siding, empty trucks at another, and even arranged a goods train for Henry. Thank you, Toby, said Henry. You did splendid. You're welcome, Henry. Maybe I can do it, Toby chuffed. But then Gordon passed. Toby watched as Gordon puffed towards the hill. Gordon puffed with all his might, but once again the express was too heavy. Gordon was stuck. Bother, he huffed. Gordon's driver called the station master, and the station master came to see Toby. You need to push Gordon to the top of the hill, he said. Yes, sir, but I am not sure. Gordon is much too heavy for me to push, he said nervously. Don't worry, Henry called. You can do it, Toby. It takes a lot of encouragement to be a bank engine, Boko said. I'll do my best. And he chuffed off to Gordon's Hill. When Gordon heard that Toby was coming, he was very cross. Toby's only a steam tram, he huffed. He will never be able to push me up the hill. Toby buffered up behind Gordon. Then he pushed with all his might. But Gordon didn't move. Is that the best you could do? He snorted. Then send a proper engine. But Toby isn't giving up. I can do it, he panted. Toby pushed harder and harder. Suddenly, Gordon's wheels started to move. Toby kept pushing. His boiler roared, his axles ached. Gordon moved slowly up the hill. When Percy was coming down the other side with the mail train and saw Toby pushing, he blew his whistle with excitement. You can do it, Toby, go on, cried Percy. Toby huffed and puffed and chuffed, but at last he pushed Gordon right to the top of the hill. Gordon was really impressed. Thank you, Toby. You did very well. Good job. Toby was tired, but he was very proud. I did it, he puffed excitedly. After that, he went back to Wellsworth to continue shunting at the yards, and he felt very proud with himself. Squeak, rattle, and roll. One day, Gordon was pulling the express out of Brendan Docks. But Diesel was on the same line. "Out of the way," sniffed Gordon. "Express train coming through." Diesel had to back off. This made him cross. "You steamies are all and clamped out," he sneered. "When the Fat Controller realizes this, you will all be scrapped." "Scrap?" scoffed Gordon. "Pa, I'm as fast as I ever was." And he chucked proudly out of the docks. Gordon was speeding through the beautiful countryside. But then he heard a horrible squeaking noise. Gordon was upset. Squeaking could only mean one thing. Something was wrong. "What if Diesel's right?" he thought. "What if the Fat Controller scraps me?" Gordon squeaked sadly up the hill. The hill was very steep, and Gordon had to slow down. The slower he went, the quieter the squeak became. Gordon was delighted. "Aha!" he said. "If I go slowly, no one will hear me squeak." And he chopped slowly back to Titmus Sheds. That evening, the Fat Controller came to see Gordon. "Tomorrow is a very special day. I am taking some village children on a boat trip," he said. "You, Gordon, have to take us to Brendan Docks. The boat leaves at 9 o'clock, so you must not be late." The next morning, Gordon waited for everyone to go. Then he puffed slowly away so no one could hear his squeak. Once out of the sheds, he started to pick up speed. Then he began to squeak again. "Oh my," said Gordon. Then he heard something even worse. It was a rattle. Oh dear, he cried. "Diesel was right. I am falling apart. What will the Fat Controller say?" So Gordon slowed down. Gordon crawled slowly into the station to collect the children. Gordon's boiler sank. If he went slowly, then the children would miss their boat trip. But if he went quickly, the Fat Controller would hear his squeak and his rattle. Once the Fat Controller and the children were on board, Gordon pulled slowly out of the station. He chopped slowly through the countryside, and he thought things were going very well. But the Fat Controller was very cross. He spoke sternly to Gordon. "What are you playing at, Gordon?" he boomed. "You must go quickly or the children will miss the boat, and that would never do." "Yes, sir," said Gordon sadly. "Remember," added the Fat Controller, "you're the fastest engine on Sodor." This made Gordon feel proud. "This might be my last trip," he said, "but I'll get the children to their boat on time." His wheels turned faster, his pistons pumped harder. Must be on time, he puffed. Soon he began to squeak, and rattle too. And then he heard another noise. A knocking noise. But Gordon didn't care. If this was his last trip, then he was going to go as fast as he possibly could. Gordon squeaked and rattled and knocked all the way to Brendan Docks. Salty, Murdoch, and Henry were both surprised. They had never heard an engine with such awful noises. "Sounds like another steamy ready for the scrapyard," sneered Diesel. But Gordon didn't care about Diesel. He had made good time and the children would catch their boat. "I made it," he cried proudly. "Thank you, Gordon," shouted the children happily. "I knew you could do it," said the Fat Controller. "But why haven't you been to the repair yard?" "The repair yard?" gasped Gordon. "You have been making lots of noises. You need to have your pistons, axles, and wheels looked at." "So you're not going to scrap me?" asked Gordon. "Scrap Gordon," boomed the Fat Controller. "The fastest engine on Sodor. Who would pull the express?" Gordon beamed with pride. Gordon spent the next day having his pistons polished, his axles greased, and his wheels well oiled. At last, he didn't make any more funny noises. Gordon was as good as new, and he felt even better. Edward the Great. The Duke and Duchess of Boxford came to visit their new summer house. They came on their own private engine called Spencer. Spencer is big and silver and very fast. When Spencer pulled into Natford, his driver had exciting news for him. "You have beaten Gordon's record," he said. Of course, boasted Spencer. I'm faster and finer than all the engines on Sodor put together. The Fat Controller's engines were very cross. Spencer's just a big silver show-off, sniffed Gordon. And everyone agreed. The Fat Controller spoke to the engines. Spencer will take the Duke and Duchess to their summer house. Another engine would take the furniture. The Fat Controller's engine saw the chance for a race. Please, sir, said Thomas, Percy, Gordon, and James all together. May I go? You all have other work to do, boomed the Fat Controller. Edward will take the furniture. James and Gordon groaned. Fancy sending Edward to do this, said Gordon. I fear he's going to lose the race and let the whole railway down, said James. Thomas and Percy had to agree with them, but they had hope for Edward. Spencer may have a bigger boiler, said Thomas, but that means more hot air. An honest steamy can beat a Paddy Puffer any day, added Percy. You go first, Edward. I'll give you a head start. Edward set off, slow and steady. Will do my best, he puffed. Spencer set off and quickly passed Edward. I won already, he boasted, and with a whoosh, he was gone. Edward came to the bottom of a steep hill. The goods was heavy and he felt very tired. Donald and Douglas were coming down the hill and see Edward struggling. Go on, Edward, cried Donald. He's a first-rate engine, added Douglas. That made Edward feel much better. He huffed and puffed and was soon at the top. He can see Spencer in the distance and chase him at once. Edward raced down the hill. Spencer stopped at Maron. The Duke and Duchess wanted to buy some tea and cakes from the refreshment lady. Edward teetered into view. Hurry up, old boy, laughed Spencer. Have you finishing too far behind me? Edward wished that he could have a rest too, but the station master and the porters had heard about the race. Hooray for Edward, they cheered. Edward picked up steam and proudly puffed past Spencer. But then the Duke and Duchess had finished their tea, and Spencer was off in a flash. He roared past Edward. Fast is the best, he chirped. Edward was nearly out of puff. The furniture felt heavier than ever. Up ahead, Spencer had to stop. The Duke wanted to take some photographs of the countryside. The Duke had set up his camera. Spencer closed his eyes. Nothing to worry about, he said lazily. Gordon was returning to the sheds. He passed Spencer and knew that Edward must be losing the race. Edward is a waste of steam, he sniffed. But when Gordon passed Edward and saw how hard he was trying, he felt bad about what he had said. Well done, Edward, he called. You are a credit to the railway. Edward was so happy that his boiler tingled. He found puff he never knew he had. The Duke and Duchess had finished taking photographs and were back on board. Time to go, said his driver, but Spencer didn't respond. He was dreaming of victory. He didn't hear his driver, and he didn't hear Edward puffing past him. Wake up, Spencer, his driver called again. When Spencer finally opened his eyes, he could see Edward heading towards the summer house. Nearly there, he gasped. I cannot lose to him. Spencer took off as fast as he could, but as he reached the siding, his driver ordered him to slow down. These are old tracks and you are a heavy engine, he said. You must go slowly. Spencer had no choice. He had to slow down, and he trundled slowly down the siding. Edward puffed towards the summer house. I won, he gasped. I did it. Suddenly his pistons didn't ache and his axles weren't shaking. Hooray, I won, he cheered loudly. Edward felt like the pride of the Sodor Railway. And he was right. Thomas, James, and the fireworks display. All the engines on the island of Sodor look forward to Harvest Festival time, but most of all, they look forward to the Fat Controller's Harvest Firework display. The Fat Controller came to see Thomas and James. James, you had to collect the fireworks from the depot. James was overjoyed. Thomas wasn't happy at all. But I wanted to collect the fireworks, Thomas pouted. The Fat Controller chose me because I'm as red as a rocket and twice as grand. Thomas, I want you to tidy up the yards at Natford. Yes, sir, said Thomas. James steamed proudly across the countryside. Brightest and best, he hummed happily to himself. He was having a wonderful day. Thomas was still upset when he arrived at the yards. Bother James, he grouched, and he biffed the trucks crossly around the yard. When James arrived at the depot, he was very excited. The wagons were all ready for him, filled safely to the top with fireworks. James was coupled up to the precious cargo, and he steamed away. Thomas shunted the last truck crossly into place. The trucks were glad that job is finished. James steamed happily along. He was thinking about the fireworks. He was imagining all the sparks flashing and the shooting stars when suddenly there was a loud noise and James ground to a halt. I had to go and call for help, said his driver. Thomas puffed back into Natford Station as Emily was letting off her passengers. Children and grown-ups from all over the island had come to see the fireworks. Seeing the children cheered Thomas up, but the Fat Controller looked concerned. I just got word that James has broken down, he said. You must collect him, Thomas, and bring him back, or the fireworks display will be cancelled. Oh no, cried Thomas, then all the children will be sad. And he set off to collect James. He found James at a signal box. Hello, busted boiler, teased Thomas. You don't look very useful now. James was upset. But when Thomas got behind James, he couldn't see ahead. You had to look out for me, said Thomas. James was very cross. You said I wasn't useful, he pouted. But if the fireworks don't get to Natford Station, puffed Thomas, then the display will be cancelled. James didn't want the children to be sad, so he agreed to look out for Thomas, and they both set off together. When the tracks were straightening clear, James called out, Go faster! And Thomas did. They were both soon working happily together and making good time. The Fat Controller checked his watch. There was still no sign of Thomas or James. It's very late, he thought. It's almost the children's bedtime. Even Emily was worried. I'll have to cancel the display, said the Fat Controller. So the disappointed children started to board the coaches. At last they could see the signals. The signal had turned red. Thomas and James both stopped. Why would the signal be red? Maybe a passenger train is coming through, puffed Thomas. Emily must be taking the children back, cried James. Thomas and James were very upset. We're here, they cried, and they both sounded their whistles as loudly as they could, but no one could hear them. The children were all on board. Emily was ready to depart. Then Thomas had a bright idea. Send up a rocket, he told his driver. So his driver carefully lit a rocket. He stood well back as it whooshed into the sky. The rocket burst into stars. The engines at Natford were all shocked what they see. A sparkling dragon, cried the Fat Controller. It must be Thomas and James. Stop, Emily, he said. The fireworks display is back on. The junction signal turned to green, and Thomas and James were soon on their way. James and Thomas were both soon into the station. The children cheered. Good work, Thomas, cried James happily. And good work, James, agreed Thomas. Good work to the both of you, said the Fat Controller. That night, Thomas and James watched the fireworks together with the other engines. I think we are both really useful, said James proudly. But we are most useful when we work together, puffed Thomas. Both engines agreed, as they continued to watch the fireworks display until it ends. The end.